Hello, and welcome to Michell Consulting's webinar series for our Michell University. Today we're going to be working with SAP Business One, and we're going to be talking about authorizations. For purposes of the demonstration today, I'm going to be using SAP Business One version 8.82, and we're going to talk about authorizations. Now, within SAP, what we do for security, instead of using passwords, we actually have something called authorizations. This allows you to set a user to be either authorized to go into a specific field or task or not, and then we can override this. So for purposes today, I have two logins. I'm logged in here as Jason, who is a manager, and Jason has full access. And I'm also logged in as an employee, Sophie, okay, and she has some limited access. So for example, if I'm going to go now as Sophie, I'm going to go into purchases and AP, and I'm going to go into a goods receipt PO. So here you can see that Sophie is not authorized to do the goods receipt PO. I can override this for one time. So for example, I can click on here, and I can log in as me, the manager. So now I am actually in the goods receipt PO. This is nice functionality because you don't have to have a situation where you have to have the user log off SAP and log back in order to do it. I can do this, so right now that Sophie now has access to goods receipt PO. When she exits and attempts to go back in, she's going to get the same message. So let's see how that works and how we set all that up. Let's go back to Jason, who's the manager. And there's a couple of things we're going to look at. First of all, we're going to go into administration, and we're going to look at the user itself. So here we're going to go to users, and we have two types of users. We can create what's known as a super user, which has access to everything, including the authorizations, and we can have a standard user. So in this case, you can see that Jason, who's using the manager code, is set up as a super user. And if I go to Sophie, she is not a super user. Now, this is important in the initial setup because when I do create a new employee, by definition, if that employee is not a super user, that employee will come in with all his authorizations set to no authorization. So even though you create them, you'd still have to go in and set them up. Even though you have a user like, for example, Sophie, and you set it up, she cannot change authorization. So even if I had Sophie, who's not a super user, and I give her full access to everything, she's not going to be able to go into authorizations. So if you see here, under System Initialization, we have the authorizations because Jason is a super user. If I go here to Sophie, okay, you can see under System Initialization, even though she may have full access to everything, without super user access, she cannot change the authorization. So you don't see the authorizations here as you do here. So that's the main thing in the user setup. So to recap that, when I do create a user, if I set the user as a super user, they have access to change authorizations, and by definition, they have authorization to everything as a super user. If I create a regular user, when I first create the user, by definition, they're going to have no authorization to anything. I can go give them full authorization to all modules and all tasks, but they will not have can get into the actual authorization setup unless they are a super user. So let's go in here and take a look at that. So let's go to administration, system initialization, and let's look at authorizations. And we're going to open this up, and we can see we have, in this case, we're going to be working with general authorizations. There are data ship authorizations and data ship exceptions, and we have a webinar. If you go to our website, www.michellgroup.com, there is a webinar in detail about data ownership. So here we're going to go into general authorizations. Okay, so let's look this up, and let's kind of see how this works. For example, if I go to Jason, who is the manager, here, you can see that everything is grayed out, and by definition, everything is full authorization. That is because he's a super user. If I look at, for example, let's say Bob, you can see that Bob is not set up a super user, and you can see different authorizations. So we can do a couple things. We can go in, let's go to, say, Carlos, and by normal definition, they're coming like this. So if we were to create Carlos for the first time as a user, he would be set up with no authorizations. Now, there's 3 types of authorizations. There is no authorization, which means you cannot access. There's a read-only and a full authorization. Now, the authorizations can be a little bit tricky when you first set them up because there are certain things that the user needs to have authorization to, even though they're not going to use it, like numbering series and so on. But today we're just going to do a general overview of how the system works. So what we normally do when we have someone create a new user, what I do is I actually click on read only. So I originally set everybody to read only. The reason why we do that is because, again, within the system, there are 3 types. Some you have full authorization, read only, and no authorization, and others you just have the full and no. So by definition, if you select the read only for everything, it'll actually set read only and no authorization. And then what you can do is later on go in. So we're going to go ahead and collapse this. So let's say Carlos is going to work in sales. So we want to give him access to everything in sales and AR. We could open up the drop down here. But what we're going to do is we can just come here and we can go to sales and AR and we can do full authorization. So now when I look at my drop down, you can see he has full. You can see various because what happens by definition if I was to change one of these, so let's say he's not going to do the document generation wizard. The minute I change one, I'm going to make that a no authorization, you can see that the main title goes from full authorization to various. See that again? So we have that. So if I do that, and then I collapse, I get the information here. So you can see here we have all these different authorizations. So again, that's one of the ways of doing it. We can do a couple things. We can expand and collapse this way to look at everything. We have some general grouping. So for example, we have general information. So here we can, for example, we can determine if the user can send the message, the print layout designer here if they want to give them access to the print layout designer, change the default report, and so on. Edit tables and document tables and all this information. So what you do is you would go in here and you would determine what you want to do. You can also do a find. So if we type in, let's say, exchange for exchange rates, we can see here the exchange rate information here and so on. So what this does is this looks at the corresponding menu here. So you can see under administration, you can see here company details. So you can allow the user to change this information. You could look at general settings for the workflow, again, posting periods and so on. Let's collapse that. So again, we can collapse. So if we want to say, let's say document, again, as we type in, we will see, again, document settings, so we can do it this way. We can also set these, again, in the various forms. So as we talked about under general, we have general information about the system. Okay, this would be normally like changing or editing and so on, editing tables. We have information for that, access to confidential accounts, account balances. So for example, what we can do is let's look at Sophie. And let's go to Sophie and let's say that access to, let's going to give her no authorization to that. And account balances, we're going to say no authorization. So let's just look at these two. So we've got that set up in the general. Let's update this. Okay. Let's go back to Sophie. We're just going to have to log off and log on. So we're going to go here to Sophie. We're going to go to Choose Company. We're going to just log off and log on. So we can be able to then make our changes here. So we're having a little issue with that responding. We'll come back to that as we log off and log on. So again, let's go back to System Initialization and Authorizations and the General Authorizations. So again, you can see what we've done here for her. And again, some are self-explanatory, like the customization tools, and then you have administration, like we said about, okay, the system initialization, if you want them to make changes to this. We have our financials, and these will most likely, if you look here, they just kind of follow the menu. So under financials, you want to give them access to the chart of account, to the account code generator, and you can see here they've kind of followed the menu. So if we go to sales and AR, and we go to sales and AR, we have that same process. So I'm having a little issue here with Sophie logging in, so let's just see if we can log back in again. Just log in for Sophie again here. Well, we'll come back. We'll get that to, let's see here. Let's just, we'll come back to that. And so here you can see that we can, again, do this. We can also, once we do this, we have some other information down here. We have the max sales discounts and purchase discounts as well as general. This is also important because you can set this for users, and what this is when you're in the actual orders. So for example, if we're doing, say, a sales order or purchase and so on, see we have these discount percentages right here. So what we can do is we can actually go in and decide here, like for example, this one here has a 2% discount. So that's controlled by the authorizations. Down here. You up to 100%. I guess we're having an issue with Sophie on this one, so we're going to we've lost our database connection, so we'll have to just stay here. You can see those information of, for example, if I was to go to, say, business partner master data, what I would do is in here, you can see how I got it to set here. So you can see that she does not have access to the account balance. So what we've done is we've taken the account balance here, which is the aging. So if I click on here, you can see, again, I don't have authorizations. What I did is I set that up. So here I can go in, and if I was to put in the manager, again, now I have access to the account balances. I can see it down here. The same holds true if I went to financials. Here, we don't have access to that. Let's give her a chart of accounts. Okay. You can see here that what's happening, she does not have access to the account. Now, what will happen is sometimes you will get the message on the screen, or in other cases, you just won't see the information. So you can see here, we do not have anything related to a balance. We also have that confidential account. So again, we can determine, let's say we're dealing with payroll. So under expenses, let's say we have some payroll accounts here. And again, we can set those as confidential accounts because we don't want people seeing those accounts. But for example, if I look at this account under Sophie, I don't have any balance here. So if I go back to mine, once again, I'm logged in as Jason, and Jason has full authorizations. And I look at the chart of accounts, you can see the difference here. So I'm looking at the cash on hand, and you can see here that I have this balance, which I can drill in to the balance. So sometimes in authorizations, you just have it set like that. So in this case, on this one, even though she doesn't have it, you really still can't get into it. So if you look here at the cash on hand, you see that there is no balance. Because again, we set that up to be not to have authorizations. And that was here. So if we went into administration and we went into authorizations again, and we go to Sophie, you can see that here we did the same thing. Account balance is no authorization, and BP, business partner, balance is no authorizations. So again, it's going to do one of two things. Sometimes when you do it this way, it will not show at all. Sometimes you'll get the prompt to actually go in and make changes. Sometimes things will be grayed out, like for example, the edit the document tables here, okay, and the print layout designer. Again, here, if I go to sales and AR and I open up a sales order, again, if I go here, I can edit my different documents, and I can also here go into, I want to edit this table, what I see, I can go here into the form settings, and I can edit the tables. We can also, once we do that, once we have it set up for one person, we can copy. So for example, let's say we have several salespeople all doing the same job, and I have 5 people that I need to have the same authorizations for. What I can do is once I determine my authorization, so for example, let's say I set everything up for Sophie, and Sophie's working fine, okay, and Sophie here, and let's say Michael do the same job. So I want Sophie's authorizations to be the same as Michael's. All I have to do is grab and highlight Sophie, and I can drag it and drop it on Michael. Even ask me, they want to copy the authorization to Sophie to Michael. I'm going to copy, and I'm going to click Update. Once I do that, you can see now that Sophie and Michael have the same authorizations. So we can do it that way. So that's how authorizations work. Again, the general overview, they're kind of simple. The key really is the setting up. And what we recommend we do with our clients is that we start during the implementation phase in the training database. We'll start right before we go live. We'll start setting authorizations. The best way to do it is put everything as no authorization, or actually as read-only and no authorization, and then turn things on. That's better, because if you do full authorization, start turning stuff off, you may not catch it. And what we'll do is usually as part of the final process flow before we go live, we'll actually do that. We'll set the authorizations. And then if we set the authorizations in one database, we can just copy them to the other database and so on. So to recap what we've learned today, we've gone through the authorizations in SAP Business One. SAP does not use passwords. We just set authorizations, so either you can allow to get in or not. There's 2 things that control that. One is the actual user setup itself. So when we go here to Setup, General, and Users, by definition, if the user is not a super user, then you can change his authorizations. When you create a new user and you define him as not a super user, by default, his authorizations will come in as no authorization. If you create a super user, for example, manager is a super user, by definition, they have authorizations to everything, and most important, they have authorizations to authorizations. As we saw before, that because Jason, the manager, is a super user, he has options to the authorization. You can see posting periods, authorizations. Let's say Sophie, even though Sophie, she's not a super user, and I give her full access to everything, here, notice that you have posting periods, then you go right to document numbering. So you can see here, you don't even have the authorizations. So you need to be a super user to actually be authorized to do authorizations. That's the difference between the super user and the non-super user. Plus the super user, by definition, you can see if I log in as manager or highlight manager, by definition everything's grayed out because the super user has everything. The other ones here, you'll see that you have access to them. You can see the breakdown here. You have general. You can drill into each particular one. Again, you can set the information here like this. You can also collapse all and expand all. Down here you have max discounts. So you have max discounts for sales, purchases, and in a general. You can also do a max for incoming payments. Again, this is important because what happens is a lot of times, a lot of users, what they do is they do all this stuff, but they leave this here at blank. So in the case of, you saw when I do a sales order and there's a 2% discount, or the customer's set up to give a 2% discount, they won't be able to add the document. Again, we could do that. We can also copy. So for example, if we have several people doing the same thing, as we saw here, we can see how Sophie has various under general and various under purchasables and AP. Everything else is full. So if we look at someone like Juan, you can see how they're different. So if I take Sophie, I hold it, and I drop it on top of Juan, it's going to give us the prompt to update. I need to update first before I do that. So I'm going to get Sophie, and I'm going to drop it on top of Juan. And again, copy authorization from Sophie to Juan. So once I do that, you'll see them now they're identical. Once I click update, you can see now Juan has the various under general and the various under purchasing AP, the same as Sophie. So that concludes our webinar today on SAP Business One authorizations. This webinar is being recorded. It'll be available on our website. You can visit us at www.michellgroup.com to view this, plus our webinars on our other tips and tricks and training on SAP Business One. And we thank you for your time.